What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Over the last week, we've seen many events from the Kursk region that have left both observers and participants in shock. We've seen video footage of soldiers being captured, armored columns moving only to meet their end, high-level video conferences, and incredibly, Ukrainian troops casually strolling through the streets of Sudzha, a Russian town. Yet, among all this chaos, there is only one missing thing: the absence of real, on-the-ground footage depicting actual military action. One would naturally expect that during an incursion of the world's largest country, there will be plenty of combat footage, fierce resistance, and dramatic military engagements. However, this is not the case. Instead, the images and videos we've seen have been anything but convincing. Some of them are outright misleading. Russia's Ministry of Defense has gone as far as recycling year-old footage from entirely different locations, trying to pass them off as recent operations in the Kursk region. Even more alarmingly, videos showing allegedly Russian troops attacking Ukrainian positions, in fact, were completely the opposite. These were Ukrainians pushing out Russians. A week has passed since the conflict spilled over into the Russian territory, yet we are left with more questions than answers. There is no clear evidence that the Russian army has taken any substantial action to counter this incursion. We've left to piece together what little information is available, and it seems that the Ukrainian advance is being slowed only by logistical challenges and the need to secure their flanks. Now, let's take a moment to consider a hypothetical scenario. What if this incursion never happened? Imagine this: Russian territory is under assault by a foreign army, and no one, not the government, not the military, seems interested in repelling them. This invading force clearly has its own objectives that involve Russian soil. Yet those who are supposed to defend it appear paralyzed, pretending that everything is under control. It's almost too surreal to believe, isn't it? This isn't the first time Russian territory has come under attack, but it may well be the first time that no one seems to care. The incursion has encountered little to no resistance from civilians, or more shockingly, from the regular army. In today's video, we'll attempt to summarize the key events of the past week, but let's be clear from the beginning. None of these events would have happened under normal circumstances. Seeing a foreign army advancing deep into Russian territory, it's not unusual, it's unprecedented. The capture of Russian towns, the occupation of Russian land, these are not ordinary events. Everything that is happening right now is out of the ordinary. What makes this situation even more alarming is the Russian government's response. Not only did they start one of the most unjust and wild wars against a neighboring country, Ukraine, a natural ally and a close neighbor, but they are now seemingly trying to normalize the invasion of their own territory. The authorities seem utterly unprepared and clueless about how to handle this crisis. This level of incompetence is not just extraordinary, it's downright dangerous. We should never, under any circumstances, accept the Russian government's failure to protect its borders as the new normal. This is anything but normal. So why is this happening? The answer, though simple, is chilling. Russia lacks military forces that can be quickly mobilized and deployed to defend Kursk region. Hundreds of Russian soldiers have been captured, and they are telling the very same story. These units, primarily composed of border guards, were not equipped or prepared for combat. They had no heavy equipment and no backup. These border guards, it seems, are the only military presence Russia can gather in this critical area. This brings us to a critical point: the fate of Russian conscripts. The issue of deploying conscripts in active combat zones is a highly sensitive and controversial topic for Putin's regime. Unlike volunteers or convicts who may have chosen to risk their lives for a chance at freedom or a substantial payout, conscripts are different. These are young men, often just 18 or 19 years old, were forced into uniform. They had no choice in the matter, and their deaths can carry far greater potential to shift public's opinion in comparison to these volunteers or criminals just seeking redemption. Conscripts have long been considered a taboo subject when it comes to active deployment in conflict zones. The Russian authorities know all too well that the death of conscripts could trigger a public outcry, one that could have severe political consequences. Up until now, they have avoided stationing conscripts in war zones, preferring instead to rely on volunteers, mercenaries, and criminals. But the situation is rapidly deteriorating. We used to speculate about the strength and the availability of Russia's military reserves, but now there is no need to speculate. The reality is stark and undeniable. There are no reserves left. The fact that a foreign army has been operating with relative ease on Russian soil for over a week is a clear indication that Russia's military reserves are all but exhausted. And when there are no reserves, the government may very well turn to conscripts, sending them into battle despite the political risks. The implications of this situation are profound and far-reaching. If conscripts are sent to the front lines, if they are used in these mid-assaults, it will set a dangerous precedent. It will normalize the use of conscripts in combat, and their deaths will become just another statistic in this brutal and senseless war. This is why it is absolutely crucial for parents, families, and human rights organizations to act now. The authorities must not be allowed to deploy conscripts without facing significant resistance. This cannot be allowed to become the new norm. The situation has become so dire that the Russian government is now offering civilians money to dig trenches, jobs that should be performed by trained engineering troops. This brings us to the next pressing issue, the possibility of a new wave of mobilization. The attack on the Kursk region has exposed the severe personnel shortages that Putin's regime faces. The current methods of recruitment, pardoning convicts and offering large sums of money to volunteers, are simply not enough to sustain these war efforts. But mobilization is not just a military issue, it is a deeply political one. The Russian government might be willing to sacrifice entire regions, Kursk, Belgrade or Bryansk, if it means avoiding the political fallout that a full-scale mobilization would bring. As of now, the authorities are doing everything in their power to downplay the severity of the situation. Propaganda has taken over, presenting the invasion as just another event, something to be noted in passing, like a regular day-to-day weather report. Russia is a vast country, and losing control over a few border districts does not pose an immediate threat to the regime. The Kremlin knows this. However, the presence of a foreign army on Russian soil is a serious blow to Russia's international reputation. It is simply humiliating. It destroys the carefully crafted image of Putin as an invincible leader, someone who can only be approached on his own terms. Over time, this weakens the regime, destroying its authority. But for now, there is no immediate physical threat to the regime. No matter how deep the Ukrainian incursion goes, it will not reach Moscow, and the Ukrainian army will not put Putin on trial, at least for now. Given this, the regime's priority is not to defend the frontiers, but to suppress the topic to ensure it fades from public consciousness. The Russian people have already forgotten about many things: massive casualties, devastating losses. Well, they can forget about these too. The government's strategy is clear: normalize the situation, keep the public distracted, and avoid mobilization at all costs. And what is perhaps most astonishing about this entire situation is the public's apparent indifference. The Russian army has nothing substantial to counter the Ukrainian advance, and instead of organizing a meaningful response, they're resorting to just bombing their own territory with airstrikes and artillery. This lack of response, this indifference is shocking, but it is exactly what the Russian regime wants. If a country at war can forget about its military losses, if thousands of eliminations on the front lines can be brushed aside without causing any political damage, then such country can forget anything. The majority of Russians had probably never even heard about this town called Sudzha before the incursion, so why should they care now? This is the logic of the regime counting on. There is no denying that one of Ukraine's goals in this incursion is political. They're not just attacking Russian territory, they're attacking Putin's image, his carefully crafted persona of invincibility. They're showing the world, and more importantly the Russian people, that Putin is not as powerful as he appears. This is an emergency, and it is one of that Russian regime is struggling to deal with. It is quite possible that in a few weeks the presence of a foreign army on Russian soil will become just another news item, something that's accepted as normal. But we must not allow this to happen. We must remember that this is not normal. We must remember that the Russian government's indifference to this incursion of its own territory once again is not normal. We've seen many regimes come and go in Russia, but we have never seen one as uncaring to country's well-being as the current one. This regime does not even try to hide this anymore. As we watch this crisis unfold, we must remain vigilant, we must remain aware, and we must continue to speak out against the normalization of what is, by any measure, a deeply abnormal situation. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you found this episode interesting. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below, PayPal donations and Patreon subscriptions where you can receive additional perks. Thank you guys so much for watching and see you on Tuesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell, their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in what they